In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a really fascinating conversation with David Catalovski, co-founder of Green Bee, a company that provides cloud-based platform and solutions for government and utilities to drive smart technology adoption and hard-to-reach user behaviours. David and I discuss his background as a lawyer and what sparked his interest in the smart community space, and why he believes Smart City is more about serving residents than any type of technology solution. David tells us about some of the projects he's working on, including the work Green Bee has done with the city of Blacktown, and how their services uses gamifications to shift human behaviour in cities for a triple bottom line benefit. We discuss why it's so important for cities and government services to be benchmarking themselves against the service and engagement of private entities, plus the challenges of reinvention and keeping up with the changing customer expectations. David and I touch on the future of work in local government and the power of partnerships, collaboration, and integration between cities and other organisations. We also have a really fascinating conversation about the need for government to measure the amount of power any one company has, and how that goes hand in hand with our need for data literacy as consumers. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trend of shifting human behaviour to promote better engagement, better well-being, and more community-minded citizens. So this episode is part of Movember, so moving from old ways to new, when we talk about government services and citizen behaviour. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, David. How are you today?
Hi, Zoe. I'm really well. How are you?
I am awesome.
Terrific.
I'm really excited to jump into this, so let's just jump straight in.
Sure.
Can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, so interesting story. My background is actually as a lawyer. So I was in the legal profession back in the early 2000s after graduating from law school. And throughout university, I was predominantly hanging around a lot of my friends, which were either studying computer science or electrical engineering. And I was one of those geeky people that were putting together computers and going to computer fairs and using sort of things like Napster and all those other things at a very, very early sort of stage. So I'd sort of been sort of geeking out on technology and software from a really long time. And that sort of meshed with my legal career as well. So I guess I treated it as a bit of a hobby as I sort of went through my sort of teenage years and sort of early sort of adulthood. And then managed to finish my legal career, also finish law school, work at a really big firm as a graduate, and that sort of wore off on me fairly quickly, even though you're getting amazing offices and perks and doing some great work. It wasn't really, I guess, what I was most passionate about, and I found that my passion sort of fizzed when it sort of became very much driven around monetary sort of incentives that sort of are dangled in front of you on a daily basis to keep billing for time instead of focusing on the work. And it wasn't until the sort of 2009, 2010 that I decided to cut the cord with that sort of career and really set out on a really unknown path in terms of technology and working, I guess, alongside government to sort of layer technology on a lot of societal problems that sort of exist locally and overseas, primarily on a local government sort of scale, because I think that's where the greatest impact can be had on a behavioural level.
Yeah, awesome. So what sparked your interest in this kind of smart city, smart community space?
Well, when we started out, I don't think that the sort of term smart cities was around. I'll tell you a funny story. One of the first meetings that I walked into with a local government about 6 years ago, they called us in for a meeting. They saw some of the pilots that would sort of run with other cities and they wanted to find out more about us. And so we were explaining it to them. It was all on a deck and was sort of showing the technology and the portals and things like that they have for citizens and driving citizen behaviours. And one of the people actually walked out And I was pretty devastated at the time. I was sort of laughing at myself, but he was a fairly old gentleman that sort of, I guess that you sort of have that sort of picture in your mind of people within local government. But he actually walked out of that meeting and thought it was just a whole load of baloney. But I'm pretty early on to trends, I guess. And that's why I sort of say, we were on this sort of smart cities trajectory before anyone within government or anyone outside of government really knew or defined what a smart city was. And to us, smart cities is really about how government can better connect with the citizens within those cities and drive human behaviours and use solutions to drive those behaviours. Because when you kind of look at a city, or actually the world, a lot of the impacts that are happening out in the world are human-based behaviours. And they're really, I think, the low-hanging fruit. And how we can incentivize or shift those behaviours or nudge those kinds of behaviours is really what our solutions are about. And they've been doing that for a really long time. And we're very recently recognised, or one of our partners was recognised in the city of Blacktown, was recognised as being highly commended by the Committee of Sydney's Smart City Awards just last week, funnily enough. So we've been doing it for a while, and they'd been a customer for a really long time. And we had nominated them on their behalf without them knowing, sneakily enough, because we thought, oh, well, if we don't become a finalist, they'll never know. But if we do, it'll be a really great surprise. We've been in the space for a while before anyone actually knew what a smart city, before we kind of knew what a smart city was. We were just out there doing this stuff that no one really knew or understood what it was. But it's really gaining traction now, which is really great to see.
So what is a smart city to you?
Well, I think a smart city for us is a city that serves its residents and its citizens, and not only serves those citizens in terms of the typical services that you can think of, but provides the right information or the right behaviour at the right time that is either focused on our health and well-being, that's focused on transportation, that's focused on waste and sustainability, and driving that information or behaviour to residents at the right point in time to shift those behaviours if the resident isn't performing the right behaviours. And so our system basically has a gamification element built into it that essentially will push something to a nudge to Zoe, or a challenge to Zoe as our sort of system uses it, to sort of shift those behaviours. So take 10,000 steps a day and perform that challenge, and you earn points by doing it. And with those points, you can redeem those points for some sort of a reward from a local venue around you or a local merchant around you. Or you can donate those points, we're actually funded by us and our bottom line, to a community group or in a form of a donation. So it's essentially creating a triple bottom line and this circular loop between the government driving the behaviour, the individual performing that behaviour, and then the business being able to benefit from that, from patronage and foot traffic, and also community groups being able to gain from it as well.
No, it's really interesting. I need to hear more about this, but let's first go to, why do you think that the smart city concept is so important?
That's a good question. I think in our perspective, I think it's important for cities to benchmark themselves against technologies and services and solutions that we've all become accustomed to. The Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, the Ubers, the Airbnbs are really setting a new benchmark, not only for other technology companies, but also for other services that we use. So this whole consumerism of these services gets imprinted on our brains, and then we look across the spectrum of services and touch points that we have with other entities or other organizations. So, that doesn't actually fit with what I've sort of seen from other solution providers, and why should that solution be so poor in terms of the value that it delivers to me? And I think that's where the opportunity exists because there's no point in sort of, utilities or government sort of benchmarking themselves against other government or other utilities, where you may be doing well, you may not be doing well, you might be somewhere in the middle, but really to benchmark yourself against the best and try and hit that benchmark. Which I think is really important, because that sort of sets the bar, raises the bar for everyone to do better and provide more innovation around service delivery and what have you to make our lives better.
Because it's about that increasing or changing customer expectation. I don't even know if it's increasing, it's just changing with what we can access.
I think it's constantly changing, and you almost have a need to constantly be reinventing yourself. And I know that's really difficult because it certainly makes life hard when you're kind of talking about planning. Typically it's sort of like, 10-year plans, 20-year plans, our 2030 plan or something like that. And it's like, well, we don't actually know what's going to be happening in 2030. We might need to reinvent ourselves every 24 months or every 18 months, the way that technology is constantly evolving and more solutions are coming to market. I think that is really scary for a lot of organizations to constantly be at the forefront and the cutting edge of what people's expectations are. And that's why I think it's really exciting in smart cities, because they're looking outside of these organizations and these silos to say, well, what else is out there? This whole thing about partnering with other people and third parties and startups, it's nothing to be fearful about. It's really where the future is. And I think a lot of the best solutions are going to come out of those partnerships, similar to sort of what we've done with our sort of customers over the last 5 years or so. I think that really stands apart.
We're kind of touching on the future of work, which is an area that I'm really interested in, and I'm going to dedicate a month of the podcast on it. And so I'm keen to just dive into that a little bit more, if you'll let me, particularly from a local government perspective. I know you aren't local government, but your clients are, your customers are. So from a local government perspective, how different, or how do you see the future of work in local government in particular changing and being really different or not to what it is now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I don't have a crystal ball handy, so I'll do my best. But the way that our organization operates and our team operates, it's very much driven by data and decision-making and tools. So we use tools to measure our effectiveness in terms of how well our solutions are performing. Once we have that data, we can change things and iterate on things, and then we can control things and push those new versions out. And if I can gaze into my crystal ball, a lot of that manual, repetitive sort of nature of whether it's local government work or other areas within the economy are very much going to be driven by humans in terms of making decisions based on data and improving those programs and services and iterating on those. Because, I think in days gone by, we had the situation of people would create programs. You and I would come up with some sort of a program in terms of it's a resident program or a business program or something like that. And we delivered it and we ticked a box, and then we went away and had a party and a celebration because we delivered it. Now, I think once you deliver it, there's a whole bunch of other stages that you need to tick off before you can deem that project a success. And that's based on how it actually performed and what the data actually said, and whether you can extrapolate that data and iterate on that to take it to the next level. And that's where I think more so what technology is going to be and smart city is going to be used is harnessing a lot of that data, using that data to build better solutions and better services. And I think that's where a lot of the human decision-making inside government is really going to change, where we're essentially going to be using solutions to help us do our jobs better and make our customers' lives better or citizens' lives better. We like to call them customers because really they're customers of a city. And so that's where I think a lot of change is going to happen inside of those organizations. We're all going to be using a stack of technology to do our jobs and getting up to speed with those technology. They're constantly going to be changing. So we need to be literate in terms of using these types of solutions and exploiting them to the best of our ability so we can deliver better services. And I think that's where our humans are going to be making a lot of those decisions based on what the tools that we're using on a day-to-day basis are telling us is actually happening out there.
And I think it's a really good point, and something I talk about a lot is measuring and monitoring aspect of the projects and programs and even BAU that we're doing. You have to build that in first, right? You can't just later on go, oh, actually we want to measure that. Oh, what happened there? It's already gone. Yeah. You've
missed the opportunity. It's similar to all of the applications that you may have on your iPhone or whatever the case may be. All of them have analytics built into them. And they're tracking absolutely how many times you're logging in a day, what pages you're looking at. And that intelligence allows you to look at, well, that feature's not really being used a lot because we have people like Zoe within her demographic don't actually like that. We should scrap that or iterate on that or improve that. Or we've found this other little nugget there that people really do love. So we need to build on that. And that's why I sort of say it's really important not to just say, okay, we've built an app, tick, that's done. You really need to continue iterating on these things. And I think that kind of culture or mentality hasn't quite been built into a lot of these organizations as yet. You know, it's something to celebrate in terms of shipping a product, sure, but you need to constantly be improving on it and capturing feedback on what your customers want and how you can better serve them with that solution.
And I think I'm just going to draw a parallel here, which may not work, but anyway, we'll see how we go. Even with like startups, we get very excited about startups and innovation and that type of thing. But actually the magic and the beauty is in the maintenance, like the maintenance of that, right?
Yes.
And so it's similar with what we do with local governments and council and whatever. And sorry, local governments and council, same thing. Other organizations, the beauty or the smart part is in the maintenance, which sounds really boring, but that's the part that I really love, because that's when you can have the greatest impact and the efficiencies. And like you said, iterations, finding out what people want, changing it. And then also, because I think we get wedded to our initial idea. We love it so much. It's like, oh no, but it has to work because I think this is amazing. It has so much opportunity. But you actually have to look at the shift and change.
Well, launching something is just the first step, right? It's like an experiment. You might hypothesize about this is a really great idea, but until you actually get it out into the hands of users, and they will tell you whether they think something's useful or not and tell you what's useful and what's not useful and what could be better. You need to open your ears to that and have channels that they can provide you feedback with, and really honest feedback. So we like brutally honest, negative feedback, because that's the most valuable part of it. I mean, if something's wrong, you want to find out why people think that, or why your hypothesis was initially wrong. And for a lot of people, that's really confronting, to think that you've spent a lot of time on something and you've spent a lot of money on something and then it failed. But really, you know, that whole lean startup methodology can be applied to so many things in terms of programs and technology solutions and the rest, because it's all about iterating and capturing feedback and iterating until you end up with a really great product that thousands and thousands of people use. So in the example that I gave with the Committee for Sydney Awards, we have around 20,000 households on that solution. And that, believe me, didn't happen overnight. It happened over the case of 4 years, but it must be one of the largest sort of local government digital sort of solution deployments in Australia, if not within Sydney. But it started off early, and credit to them, they took a chance, you know, and I think it's turned out to be a really great partnership in that sort of sense. But I think you need to take a bit of risk when you're talking about technology and smart cities. You're not going to have all the answers. You know, your customers and your users are going to provide you with those answers, but you need to get something in their hands first before you can make any assumptions. So that's really the important part of it, and the secret sauce to improving people's lives and improving services, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've touched on what you're currently doing, but is there anything else you want to add to that conversation?
Well, we started off in this realm of sort of local government, which, looking back, was probably the most difficult path you could possibly choose. But because of that, and because of the reputation that we've built up in that sort of realm very early on, we've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity of working alongside a lot of really great utilities, doing some really cutting edge work with demand management and customer base and engagement around utilities and our energy resources and water resources. So it's very similar to smart cities in that sense. But the thing is, with these utilities, you're only looking at managing one resource. So the behaviours around how we use energy, the behaviours around how we use water, how we interact with those resources, and then, you know, using behavioural insights to nudge those behaviours in a different direction. So it's very similar to sort of smart cities. I think smart cities are actually a lot tougher, because cities have a far broader remit in terms of what they're trying to do around health and well-being, transportation, sustainability, waste. Even though they sort of try and sum it up as roads, rates and rubbish, cities are a lot more than roads, rates and rubbish, I can assure you, because we all have an impact when it comes to our cities, and our behaviours have an impact, and we interact with them on a daily basis. So where we sort of cut our teeth with cities and those types of things in terms of behavioural insights and driving those types of behaviours with our sort of solutions and adding that customer layer, has really helped us when we've sort of branched out into other industries and other verticals with our solutions, where we've had, a couple of customers win other awards, both locally and internationally. So it's been great being able to make an impact in that regard, and a lot more enjoyable than reading law journals.
Yes. Although I do enjoy a good, piece of legislation. Telling my secrets now.
In another reality, I would agree.
So how do you think that we're embracing this concept, this smart city concept in Australia?
Yeah, I think it's really accelerated in the last 2 years. And I think there's a lot to be learned, and sorry for sort of pushing our own book a little bit here. I think there's a lot to be learned by partnering with third parties and people and organizations such as ourselves and others who are able to collaborate, because we know that sometimes government has the bureaucracy that's sort of behind it that slows innovation down. But I think when you're sort of partnering with someone that's going to be constantly pushing you and challenging you to come up with the best solution is really exciting and inspiring. We've seen some really great work happen when those two teams can come together and make some amazing things work. So I think it's kind of like still the first or second over for what smart cities can potentially be. I have a vision of it in terms of how I'd like to interact with my city better. The only thing standing in the way is the speed at which that can be made to happen from a government sort of side. Because I guess if you handed over the keys to a city to a technology company, they would move at such a rapid pace. But obviously, the wheels in government don't obviously move as fast as some people would like, either internally or externally. And that's why I think things are still sort of happen and move very, very slowly. But they are moving at a more rapid pace, I think, than they did 10 to 15 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think handing over the keys to a technology company is problematic in the sense of, yes, they might move fast, but when they break things, it may be somebody's livelihood or life or whatever. Someone once said on the podcast, I think it was Nick Camels, that if government ever catches up to innovation, then we're not innovating anymore or something like that.
No, most definitely are not. But then again, if you hand too much control over to startups and technology companies, then you can potentially end up with what we saw with the likes of Facebook. And I have this conflicted opinion in terms of Facebook and social media, because I think they have too much power. And I think part of that is because government's kind of given them too much power. I think it's a really great strategy from Facebook's side, and sorry to anyone from Facebook who's listening, but a really great business strategy from Facebook's side in terms of encouraging all of these government entities and organizations to build up their Facebook page and build up the followers on that, and then have all their posts and restrict them, and to keep the audience on there and maintain it. And it's a great bait and switch angle from there. And giving away your product for free certainly is a part of that. But not giving government access to the data and owning their audience or owning the followers of that specific is sort of a little disingenuous. So I think that if government had ownership over that data and the privacy of its citizens, that we could build better solutions in being able to leverage that. But unfortunately, the company out there, Facebook, probably knows more about me than I know about myself and everyone else. So it can be used for good and can also be used for bad.
Yeah, and I have the same conflicts in my head all the time, and obviously not just Facebook, but other large companies. And the fact that a lot of the time we actually, even from a non-tech perspective, but products we buy and that type of thing, we think we're buying from a small local business or something, but they're owned by another huge company or whatever because they've been bought out and now they own my data, whatever. And so there's all these things, and I think it's going to be a huge space coming up, and it already has started with, the GDPR and the new laws in California, and it's something that I'm really, really interested in. And, whatever decisions we decide to make with our data after that point is fine, but at the moment we're not informed, and because we can't be. I think the tools that typically would be made by the big tech companies, they don't want people to know too much because then we can make decisions about those things which may be against what helps that tech company grow or whatever. And, we might make the same decision, which is fine, but that informed citizen or that smart citizen or whatever you want to call it, but actually knowing what our digital footprint is, what our data footprint is, having literacy behind that data and the decisions that we're going to make and that other people are making with our data, and what exchanges of value are happening there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a space that I'm really keen to dive more deeply into, and I think it will become and is starting to become huge. And I think in that smart community space, it's really important because we don't want to go too far and kind of stop any kind of, data exchange or anything like that, but we need to understand what value we're sharing or we're exchanging.
Yeah, and how that data is being monetized at the end of the day, which is kind of part of the problem in terms of, as has very recently been discovered with the likes of Facebook, again, in terms of how that data is actually being monetized by these companies to a great degree. And that's people like you and me that innocently enough are giving away a lot of our sort of data that we think for good, but it's used kind of in other ways. And it can have a potential global impact when you're able to leverage that data, and it can affect things such as elections and people's opinions and views on things. So I think that's kind of going down a very slippery sort of, and people need to understand how that data can be exploited.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think in the very near future, what that could actually look like, that data value exchange, is really interesting. But we can't do it if people don't know, if they don't understand, how that data is currently flowing into the world and how much and what types of things we could exchange and that type of thing as well. And some regulation behind it, right?
I agree. I think you should. In fact, I think and it probably will defeat the entire model behind sort of social media and the way it's monetized. But I feel that you should have the right to pay for the use of social media, whether it's something like $10 a year or something like that, and your data will not be harvested or sold, and you will have complete privacy. But I guess that's probably a conversation for another day. But it would make everyone a lot safer in that regard when you're kind of using a service and you're paying for that service and your data isn't a part of that service.
Okay, that was a great convo. Thanks for adding to that.
It's a pleasure.
I have 2 more questions. Okay. What are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
Good question.
I think we've just been talking about one of them.
I think we kind of have. From our side, the one that we're really passionate about is, I think, really the low-hanging fruit. We can talk about infrastructure and Internet of Things and things like that, but our kind of scope is really on people and how we can get to Zoe and shift Zoe's behavior, because we're all addicts in terms of our behavior in some way, shape or form. We all do the same things habitually. How do we shift those behaviors? How can we have people more focused on health and well-being, more focused on sustainability and those types of behaviors? How can we get to the crux of those types of behaviors to shift them, whether we're leveraging the carrot or the stick? And we prefer to use the carrot in terms of intrinsic or extrinsic incentives to drive those types of behaviors, or social norming. So really the behavioral science part of how people interact. And we've sort of seen those kinds of behavioral insights units, nudge units, sort of, I guess, start to gain traction within sort of governments. And essentially they do the same sort of stuff that we do, but we were first. And we have technology solutions that do those types of things that can be layered across those types of behaviors. So that's really where we sort of think that the low-hanging fruit is. It's a lot easier to deploy technology solutions and layer technology over behavioral problems than it is to go and invest tens of millions of dollars on hardware. And when you're kind of looking at Internet of Things and the impacts of those types of behaviors, if you extrapolate them, quite significant. So that's really the interesting part that we sort of think that there's a lot of ROI on. And we're only, I think, scratching the surface of those potential impacts.
Well, thanks so much, David. It's been great to talk to you today. And thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
I just have one last question.
Sure.
How can people connect with you?
Oh, they can probably find me on LinkedIn, David Catalovski, or they can shoot me an email, which is david@greenbee. That's GREENBE.com.
Excellent. We'll put the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. Thanks again.
Terrific. Thanks very much.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter @SmartCommPod. That's Comm with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.